Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I bought in the month of March. I'm going to start off with a little bit of fiction. First, I have The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Dimeline. This is a dystopian novel centered around Indigenous people by an Indigenous person. The synopsis just sounded really interesting. I actually heard about it through one of Etu Brody's videos that I can link in the description. So I'm pretty excited about this. It looks really good and it's won a lot of awards. I was surprised that the first that I'd heard about it was through their video. Next, I have the ebook of A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney. I actually read this for the Zodiac-a-thon, so if you want to know more about what I thought about that, you can go check out that vlog. Next, we have some graphic novels. First, there is American Born Chinese by Jean Lin Yang. This book kind of focuses on two characters. You have the one main character who's kind of going through coming of age, high school sort of things. And the other character is the Monkey King, who's looking for somebody to take his place on the throne. Their lives somehow get intertwined. It sounds interesting, and I've heard a lot of good things about this, so I'm looking forward to it. Next, I have the first two volumes of Motor Crush, which involves gays and motorcycles, and that's pretty much all that I needed to know that I should buy it, mostly because of my experience with Road Queen, which was fantastic. But even beyond that, there's a lot of other good stuff. I've heard a lot of people recommend it. It kind of focuses on racing, so motorcycle racing, and there is kind of illegal performance-enhancing drugs involved. It sounds super cool. The artwork looks badass, so this is definitely a series that I'm looking forward to getting into. Next, we have Skim by Mariko Takami and Jillian Tamaki. Mariko Tamaki was one of the authors of Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, and that's how I ended up finding this book and why I decided to get it. But this is a realistic fiction kind of coming of age story that deals with death and sexuality, among other things. Next, I'm going to show you all some of the books that I got specifically for my reading list on HIV and AIDS activism in the US. I can link that full list if you're interested in checking that out. The first book is fiction, actually, and that's The Gifts of the Body by Rebecca Brown. I was recommended this book on Instagram. This is about a woman who is a caretaker for people who have HIV and AIDS. It talks about grief and also like dignity for the dying and things like that. And this comes from an author who was an at-home care provider during the heights of the AIDS epidemic. The next three within this category are all nonfiction. First, we have a memoir, Queer and Loathing by David Feinberg. In this, he talks about some of his experiences with activism, but he also talks about kind of the end of his life and dealing with AIDS himself. Next, we have The Secret Epidemic, The Story of AIDS in Black America by Jacob Levinson. This talks about the impact of the AIDS epidemic in different parts of the Black community. And finally, in this category, we have How to Survive a Plague, the inside story of how citizens in science tamed AIDS by David France. So this looks at the actual impact that a lot of the activism had, and kind of how we went from kind of the heights of the AIDS epidemic to it now being a more manageable condition. The next books that I have are all nonfiction. This first one that I have is Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator, Uncommon Love and Life by Amy Garan. And this book focuses on polyamory and non-monogamy. It talks about different ways that you can practice non-monogamy, different like relationship setups, but it also has information about how to deal with an array of types of relationships in terms of like how to deal with people and like a personal growth kind of situation. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the nonfiction books that I have on race and gender. This first one just focuses on race, but it is Black Skin, White Mask by Franz Fanon. And this book was originally written in 1952, but it is a psychological study looking at like the psyche of Black people who are in this very white-centered, oppressive world. So it takes psychology and sociology and sort of mixes them. It sounds really interesting. I feel like I'd heard about it a little bit before, but really hearing about it on Brianna's Library a few times really made me want to get it. So if you want to hear more about this, definitely check out their video. Next, I have How We Get Free, Black Feminism in the Combahee River Collective, edited by Kianga Yamada Taylor. This book is basically a historical look at Black feminism. It starts off with writings from the Combahee River Collective, which was a feminist organization in the 60s and 70s, but then it looks at writing from people since then too, ending with a work from a more contemporary activist. And it basically talks about the spirit of Black feminism and how it's still relevant today. This is one that I saw kind of floating around Instagram, but I've also done a little bit of research into the Combahee River Collective, so I was more interested in learning more about kind of their stances and their history. The next book that I have is Not Your Princess, Voices of Native American Women. This is a collection of essays, poetry, and art from Indigenous women. This kind of gives you a look into what it's like to be a Native American woman in modern day. A lot of the next books that I'm going to be talking about are ebooks, and that is because there is a sale that went on. There were several free ebooks and a lot more that were like $3, so of course I couldn't stop myself from buying a ton of them. But a number of them were also on race and gender. First we have Mistaken Identity, Race and Class in the Age of Trump. This is kind of a deeper look at identity politics using older Black revolutionary writings. So it looks at all of that within the current political context and how this political context has impacted identity politics, or how identity politics has been used. In some ways, this looks to me like it's going to be talking a little bit more about kind of the insidious nature of racism through some of the way that certain people use identity politics. I could be wrong, but it looked like a really interesting read regardless. Next we have Racecraft, The Soul Inequality of American Life, and this is by Karen and Barbara Fields. From the synopsis, it looks like this is a sociological look at how racism shapes racial categories, and also how all of that is impacted by other kinds of oppression as well. Next we have Latinx, The New Force in American Politics and Culture, and that is by Ed Morales. This is a critical look at racial categories in the United States. To quote part of the synopsis on Goodreads, the book is a challenge to America's infamously black-white racial regime. And they kind of compare it to Race Matters by Cornel West, which I'm actually planning on reading this month. So hopefully I can finish reading that and then read this immediately after. That's the plan at any rate. Next we have De Coloris Means All of Us, which was originally published in the 1990s, I believe, but it looks at activism, organizing, and empowerment from a Latina perspective. Next we have Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman. This book was originally published in the late 70s, and then there were some updates in the 90s, but it looks at how Blackness has been masculinized in a lot of society, and they talk about the negative myths that this has created specifically for Black women. And then we have Invisibility Blues by Michelle Wallace. This is a historical analysis of Black feminism and a look at its role in today's society. And finally we have Feminism for the 99%, a manifesto, which draws on feminism of women in various countries, particularly within the global south. And they've sort of created a manifesto that's anti-racist and anti-capitalist after the stuff that those activists have done. That is it for race and gender. Now we can move on to books on sexuality. First I have Families We Choose, Lesbians, Gays, Kinship. I am really not jazzed about the fact that they put this in the very center of the book cover. I would try to peel it off, but I'm a little afraid of damaging it. But that doesn't really have to do with the content of the book. This is based on sociological research that was done in the early 90s, and it looks at kind of the role of families within the LGBT community. I imagine it will talk some about being forced to leave their original families, but I imagine it will probably explore the phenomena of chosen family. I thought that this was an important historical look, and I think that it can tell us a lot about how stuff is today too, even if it's not the exact same. Then next I have Odd Girls and Twilight Lovers, A History of Lesbian Life in 20th Century America. This goes decade by decade and looks at different subcultures within the lesbian community. So it kind of puts together a lesbian history, which is really nice, particularly because most of the history books that I found focus on gay history. So I'm looking forward to learning more about the lesbian community as well. Next, we have more history with Transgender Warriors by Leslie Feinberg. And this book looks at figures throughout history who were trans. This even looks at people who were around kind of before we had the language of transgender, but they kind of look basically at various figures who were gender variant, who might fit into that category. And then we have another piece by Leslie Feinberg, Transliberation, which is a series of essays and speeches that they've made that talk about transliberation. And then I have one book that fits in with LGBT studies that I got on that same ebook sale, and that is Trans, a Memoir. This deals with her experience transitioning and her own kind of personal story, but she also talks about politics within this as well and how that impacted her. And the next few books that I have are kind of general nonfiction with a couple of different topics. I've got a couple of books on housing. First, we have The City of Segregation by Andrea Gibbons. This is a historical look at segregation, specifically in LA, but it looks at the impact that this has had on people of color, and it looks at the patterns of injustice. So once we identify these patterns, we can then figure out ways to break out of them. And the second book that I have on housing is called In Defense of Housing by David Madden and Peter Marcuse. And this is basically a look at the housing crisis, looking at some of its causes and what exactly it is, as well as possible large-scale solutions. And the final two books that I have are both on the environment. They are A Planet to Win, Why We Need a Green New Deal, and The Case for the Green New Deal. These both, of course, talk about the specific piece of policy that's been put up, the Green New Deal, and how that could impact the people of the United States and the environment. So those are all of the books that I bought in March. I think I bought them all used online, with the exception of the ebooks and possibly with the exception of How We Get Free. I bought the majority of these on Better World Books, which you get free shipping on, and they also donate some of their proceeds as well as kind of donation matching. So every book you buy, they'll donate a book to a couple of different book programs. I like to recommend them. You can't really find newer stuff on there, but they do have a lot of other good options. So let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books or if there are any of these that you think that I should read first. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.